Good afternoon, good morning to our online participants who are now attending in great number, 41, and hubs in Brazil, Tunis, and Southeast Europe. We are starting our April summary monthly briefing. For those of you who are new at this briefing, every last Tuesday in the month at 1 o'clock Geneva time, we try to summarize the main developments during the previous few weeks. And today we will summarize the main developments during the month of April. As always, we are trying to indicate the major trends and the major long-term trends that have been accelerating or decreasing in relevance during this month. For this briefing, we have a unique pleasure to have today with us a person who is behind many researches and digital newsletter. Today with us is Dr. Stephanie Borg-Psaila. She just came from Malta. She's editor of the JIP digital newsletter. She coordinates our team of curators, and she's basically the person behind the research, in-depth research that we conduct for every newsletter and for following of digital issues continuously. Welcome, Stephanie. It's great to have you here, and thank you for your work. She will be also helping me during today's briefing. Now, we will basically start, and if Arvin can move to the first one. Steph will start with a summary of the major events. As you know, we will go through the major events during the month of April. Then we will focus on the barometer. What is the situation with the increase and decrease of pressure in digital politics? And we'll identify and go in depth on 5 major trends. This is the plan for the briefing, and we will conclude with the indication of what we can expect during the month of May. Steph, please.
Thank you, Jovan. It is a pleasure to be with you in Geneva today. Usually I'm on the other side, so usually I'm following online. A warm hello to the online audience also, and a special hello to the trainees to become assistant curators for the GIP Digital Watch Observatory. They're following us today. And an honor to be sharing the spot with you, Jovan, today. So what we'll do today is, as we do every month, we'll look at the main events in April. We will also look at the main developments in April, and Jovan will then analyze the trends. We will then look at the main events for May, and finally a few updates from the Geneva Internet Platform and DiploFoundation. Usually the months are very busy in digital policy, and April was no exception. There are usually many local, regional, and global events. And here we have listed what we believe are the main global events. So we have from AREN's 39th meeting, AREN is the Internet Registry for Internet Numbers, through to UNCTAD's e-commerce week this week. We also saw the G7 foreign ministers meeting, very important meeting there. Also the G20 meeting of ministers responsible for the digital economy. We also had the Knowledge for Development conference organized by the Joint Inspection Unit, co-organized actually with the Knowledge Management Austria, and also thank you for enlarging the screen, and also the interregional conference of the OSCE in Seoul, and the Future of Work We Want, which is the conference organized by the International Labour Organization. I'm mentioning specifically these few events because our team, the GIP rapporteurs, were present for the Knowledge for Development conference, the Future of Work We Want, and this week we're also reporting from the UNCTAD e-commerce week, and the reports, the event report, session report, you can find on the observatory by clicking on events at the top and then on past events, and you'll see the reports. Next, you click on the event and the reports will come up. So we can move on to the next slide, which is the barometer. So the barometer analyzes or looks at the prominence of specific issues from month to month. We can see that some of the issues are always prominent, like, for example, security, digital rights, and mostly e-commerce. They are practically always very prominent from month to month. There are other issues which then oscillate in prominence. Now, these are a summary of all the developments that have taken place this month. You will find all the developments on the observatory, so that's http://dig.watch. They are summarized here in the barometer, and they will be also summarized in the newsletter. So the April newsletter is out at the end of the week. And I'm just going to highlight a few developments, and Jovan will then analyze 5 specific trends that have taken place. So the first is related to the global IG architecture. We saw that Microsoft continued to shape the proposed Geneva Digital Convention, and this month, on the 14th, Brett Smith, CEO of Microsoft, published 3 additional documents. So the first document adds flesh to the convention. It proposes certain clauses that Microsoft believes can be added to the convention, such as, for example, states should not request backdoors to be added to commercial products. The second document is a tech accord, so it's basically a set of principles for the technical community. And the third document proposes an attribution organization, which Microsoft believes it should be non-governmental, which gauges on the expertise of the technical industry to be able to attribute attacks to basically state-sponsored attacks. So that's Microsoft proposal, which Jovan will analyze in more details together with the G7 declarations. A second update, I mentioned the Chinese president's visit to the US. He met with President Trump. They discussed cybersecurity apart from other issues. Not many details there, so it was more of a confidence building meeting. But what we do know is that they will be using high-level dialogue mechanisms in their 100-day plan. The 100-day plan will address trade imbalances. A third update relates to Uber's legal woes. We have been, as part of, we have an ongoing study by the Geneva Internet Platform looking at court action, so it's rulings of authorities, rulings of the courts related specifically to Uber. And this month, also Jovan will analyze that in detail, but this, for example, this month there were 2 new court cases. So an Italian, a Rome court, and the court in Brazil have ruled that Uber taxi drivers are actually employees. So what are the repercussions there? A fourth highlight is the fact that Cameroon finally has internet access after 39 days. The only thing is that the government has said that the country can go through the same thing again. Related to this, there is an EFRINIC proposal, quite an interesting proposal, which will be discussed during EFRINIC's next meeting. So the proposal is that the registry would stop allocating IP addresses to governmental entities that have shut down internet access. So that would be a proposal. That's an interesting proposal to follow. A fifth update would be related to the concerns that the European Parliament has with regards to the Privacy Shield. The European Parliament is concerned that where the data has been accessed by law enforcement agencies, neither the Privacy Shield nor the US administration's letters of assurance they show judicial redress in these cases. So these are privacy-related concerns that have been flagged by the European Parliament. A sixth highlight relates to the FCC's internet privacy rules. They have been repealed. So the privacy rules used to state now that broadband companies, if they need to use the data for targeted advertisements, they had to request permission from the users. A seventh highlight, and this relates to the jurisdiction and legal issues, is the fact that Twitter has refused a US government request for the data user account behind a specific Twitter account that has been criticizing the Trump administration and specifically on immigration issues. And Twitter obviously has refused to divulge the details. Are we seeing another Apple FBI issue there? That remains to be seen. And that brings me to the end of my review. Over to you, Yuval.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you for navigating us through the barometer and highlighting some of the developments that we'll now discuss in more detail. One point that you mentioned, and it has been is becoming one of my pet projects, is sort of the question of the figures and numbers in digital field. We speak a lot about data society, but we have very little solid information about flow of data, about, let's say, cybersecurity risks. I found something from 300 million to billions, trillions. I guess that people sometimes just flip the coin and say risk of the cybersecurity is 1 trillion. And good news is that some people started working seriously on addressing this, and I attended very good session during the e-commerce week, presenting Ipsos study supported by ISOC and few other organizations. They did a study, traditional study, on the sample of 25,000 people from 24 countries, asking them about the question of trust, whom they trust online, do they trust internet service provider, states, governments, and I wrote a summary from the session, but you can find all PowerPoints on the UNCTAD website. There will be a need for much more solid data, and we see it on the mailing list, we see it all over the place. People use very easily, either in the context of cybersecurity, what is the financial risk, or I found it on estimates on e-commerce. Again, anything can be, depends what people want to prove. Trillions, millions, what is the border zone? Of course, nobody can be very scientific because ultimately internet and e-commerce is becoming part of almost any activity. But there should be some sort of more rigorous approach when we deal with data. Because once you give the figure of the risk, you usually imply some action. You want to scare people, or you want to do awareness building, positive or negative. That's one trend which I haven't prepared in advance for the presentation, but was inspired by Stephanie's summary. And we have to put more efforts in order to know what is going on basically effectively in cyberspace. Now we will be moving. Could you just enlarge a bit this screen? We will be going through the 5 major trends that we identified, issues that require a bit deeper reflection. The first one is the renewed discussion on state behavior. If you can recall, since the very beginning of the year, we indicated that the governments and states are getting back into the cyber issues, mainly through cybersecurity door. Therefore, governments are responsible for security. This is as old as the Hobbesian Leviathan, the tacit social contract between citizens and the government. And they are now moving through different angles. One is the UN government group of experts, UNGG. But new developments was a Microsoft proposal to establish Digital Geneva Convention. And I use at one presentation that Microsoft passed the Rubicon. Because in the past you had rarely private companies suggesting the adoption of the conventions. It was done by Brad Smith, the president and the chief legal officer of Microsoft, and we analyzed it already. He proposed the Digital Geneva Convention by using analogy with humanitarian conventions, and he argued for neutrality of the internet using analogies with the Swiss neutrality. After that, there were quite a few comments. We did in-depth analysis and published it. Now, last week, there was another move which gave a more let's say, substance and flesh to the initial proposal. Stephanie mentioned it, that they published basically 3 documents. And we'll analyze 3 documents for our newsletter with the key clauses. Therefore, they literally started drafting the convention. One is backdoor clause. There is a list of clauses which to the large extent overlaps with the reports of the UN government group of experts. But there are some new elements. Tech sector accord for the cooperation among the technological sector companies. And probably the most controversial one is the setting up of independent attribution organization. Therefore, they argue that there should be technology-driven attribution organization which can identify source of attacks and the cybersecurity crisis. This means that basically technology sector and internet companies will get together and say, okay, in this case, it seems that the source of attack is government X or government Y or non-state actor or whoever else. I guess that this will be probably the most controversial part, because question of attribution is the crucial question. Can we attribute some cyber attacks to the governments? Now, this is linked to the another 2 developments. One is G70 Foreign Ministries Joint Communiqué, which pushed a bit stronger international law, use of international law principles in the field in cyber field, which ask governments to observe their duties in international, which is a general statement, but I would say it's like just pushing a bit of barometer higher. We need a more international law. But what was even more interesting for me, being a lawyer and incidentally having my master thesis in state responsibility, is that the G7 Declaration on Responsible State Behavior argues that governments should follow the customary international law on state responsibility. And this is in the international legal circles, it's a very controversial issue. What is a customary law? And governments are generally very, very cautious when they have to be responsible internationally. It requires question of attribution, assigning specific acts to the government officials, damage, link between damage and action, whole list of the summarized in so-called draft articles of International Court Commission in 2001. Now the real question is, practically speaking, if there is attack from country X against infrastructure in country Y, can country Y prove that it was done by state official in country X? Almost impossible, not completely, but almost impossible, because countries use proxies. Now the question is, then it's moved, would country X be responsible by the fact that it didn't prevent, and this so-called objective responsibility, therefore whatever comes from the other territory, you're responsible what's going on your territory. And it is a bit tricky proposition. Then governments, obviously, if they are made responsible for whatever is coming from their territory, will say, okay, we need much more means and tools to ensure that responsibility, which would involve more surveillance, more control, and probably some shifts which could challenge some human rights on the internet. Therefore, that line from the communique is very, very interesting line, and I'm sure it will trigger a lot of discussions. Now, there are definitely, we are waiting for UNGG report, which will be finalized at the end of June. And one of the issues is to see how it will react to some of these developments, including state responsibility, but also what will be the body or instrument of mechanism that will follow to the UNGG work after it ends up with General Assembly resolution in September this year. Therefore, there will be many developments, and we'll be following it closely. We'll be analyzing these 3 documents by Microsoft for our, therefore you will receive over the next week in-depth analysis of these 3 documents, and that we should keep definitely high on our policy radar, what's going on in the government's involvement in cybersecurity issues, with the Microsoft proposal and UNGG activity as two major, I would say, pillars of the developments in this field. Next, please. We have, as you know, after the presidential elections in the United States, the new government expressed already on a few occasions the view that the rules of the net neutrality should be revisited and revised, and that's there is the question of changes in the existing rules which were introduced in 2015 under Title II Telecom Acts, where basically federal communication commissions introduced net neutrality principles. Now there is an interesting negotiation. The internet companies, who are major supporter of the net neutrality, they strongly oppose the FCC proposals and testing balloons and a few ideas, and they said, no, this is the red line. We need to preserve net neutrality. But like it happens with many red lines, they now are ready to negotiate. They're ready to achieve some sort of compromise with the FCC, and it is very, very interesting dynamics. Now, what is going on in the North American continent is that Canada is, while US is shifting in one direction with net neutrality, Canada is going in the opposite direction. They're trying to reinforce strongly the question of net neutrality. That would be an interesting division in the continent, with the US basically dismantling net neutrality regime. We'll see to what extent, and Canada strengthening it. And since many internet companies are operating across the national border, this border in the cyber are very, very weak. You have many companies in Toronto, in Vancouver. It will be interesting how it will work with changing net neutrality rules. Next. Next one, please. Okay, this has been an underlying topic. We have been waiting for quite some time for the ruling of European Court of Justice. European Court of Justice is still quiet, but we heard from staff that there are other courts are active, and we have a ruling by Italian and Brazilian courts arguing that Uber drivers are employees. This is one of the important issues. As you can record, there are two important issues in more or less all Uber cases. First is classification. Is Uber service an Uber company, technology company, information company, or transportation company? Depending on the classification, many rules, different rules will be applied. And second rule is about the status of Uber drivers. Are they free consultants, which Uber is arguing, or they are basically should be employees, as court in Italy and Brazil argued. I think that the major developments, the major ruling will be ruling of European Court of Justice, but what we've been hearing is that it is very difficult ruling, even more difficult than Privacy Shield. Therefore, it takes it has been postponed. I think it was the first announcement was in November, postponed for the last 4 months, and it will probably take more time because it will have enormous impact on the platform economy. Yes, yes, that's that. Spain. Next, please. Another trend which is clear but accelerating a bit is the intermediaries' roles. Governments, private companies are under increasing pressure to play more active role when it comes to the content, and generally companies are very reluctant because that can undermine their business model. But governments are putting pressure on the, for example, in Europe, in particular Germany, is putting a lot of pressure on Facebook and internet platforms to deal somehow with fake news, with misuse of the internet, and the other developments. And Microsoft is trying to, you see the different strategies. Microsoft is trying to shape cyber norms, like through the Digital Geneva Convention and other. Microsoft was always more sort of relaxed than other companies to talk to governments and to find some sort of arrangement. Facebook is focusing recently on so-called revenge porn, which is becoming a big issue. Former sort of when trust that exists in love turns into the vicious fight, and there are quite a few problems with it, which Facebook is addressing. Google is trying to expand fact-checking tools for Google Search and Google News, using to the largest extent artificial intelligence. Steph mentioned the Twitter request by US government. There are also an interesting report with Richard drew my attention of the Canadian authorities on the question of spam and how to combat the spam, and we'll report in the newsletter. Therefore, this is, let's say, ongoing trend, but with a few major developments during the month of April. Next one. And we have major developments in child abusive material, child abusive sexual materials monitoring, and the perpetrators are becoming much more sophisticated in masking their materials, in masking their sort of approach. They use different masking techniques. They use the new websites. They use increasingly new GTLDs, which is becoming a problem for ICANN in order to distribute this type of materials. And we have been following it carefully. The majority of materials are still hosted in North America, and with the shift to Europe, with increasing volume of this type of materials hosted, for example, in the Netherlands. But all of these details will present in the newsletter. These are the major 5 developments which you can consult and find the more links and details of the studies behind it on the website and also in the newsletter. Next, please. And here we come to the plan for the next month. It's on 2 pages, and let me try to identify, to pick few events which are highly relevant for Geneva. There will be meeting of the working group on enhanced cooperation between 3rd and 5th May here in Geneva. It is, you know, that this is one of the bodies of the Commission of Science and Technology for Development, which is dealing with enhanced cooperation, one of the outcome of the World Summit on Information Society. Just to recontextualize, the World Summit on Information Society decided to establish Internet Governance Forum. It has also the follow-up lines which are taking care of the WSIS Forum on e-health, e-trade, and other issues. And enhanced cooperation was one of the outcomes, and since then, well, now it's 12 years, international community was discussing how the enhanced cooperation should be organized, and the meeting will be held in early May. Then of the important meetings, there will be multi-stakeholder forum on science and technology and innovation for SDGs in New York, another politically important event for the internet and ICT technology. And you can follow on the other specific events in more details. Next. Then there will be also important meeting on global forum cyber expertise. There will be G7 summit in Taormina, which will most likely codify those inputs which we mentioned during in declaration about state responsibility for activities in cyberspace. Southeast Europe will have a CIDIG meeting in Ohrid and will be involved quite a lot in it. African Internet Summit in Nairobi. As you can see, the developments are really picking up. The calendar is becoming busier and busier, and June, this is preparation for June. For the May is sort of build up for extremely busy June, where there will be quite a few events: Internet of Things Summit, Artificial Intelligence for Good, WSIS Summit, and a few other smaller events related to digital developments. This morning we had a session with the ambassador from GRULAC countries. GRULAC stands for Latin America, a group of Latin American countries. And one of the points that we discussed was digitalization of multilateral policy agenda. Here we are mainly focusing on the traditional IG-ICT related issues, whether it's ICANN, whether it is ITU, IGF, and other actors. What is happening, and we are noticing it in Geneva as a clear trend, that you have strong digitalizations of other traditional agendas. ILO is discussing future work. For the future work, the digital is the key. and issues like what is the status of Uber drivers. WTO has e-commerce high on the agenda for the Buenos Aires ministerial meeting. This week, across the street, we have an e-commerce week at UNCTAD. WHO is discussing the question of the data protection of the data in the field of health. Literally, you can go to almost to any organization and you can see that the digitalization of their agenda is becoming very high on the prominent. Next. Could we have next slide, please? Okay, what is currently planned for our activities on Geneva Internet Platform? We have the launch of just-in-time course on digital commerce tomorrow at 8:30 at the room 23 in Palais. And we'll try to follow the trace of data and money on the internet in order to introduce discussion on digital commerce, literally to see when you send a message from the UN here in Geneva to UN in New York, what is the literal trace of this message. On the 30th of April, Geneva Digital Watch will be published. It will celebrate 20th issues. Congratulations, staff, for making this remarkable development. And then we'll have a Digital Geneva 2017, how data is shaping our future. Data is in focus of the activities. Training for new assistant curators of the Digital Watch Observatory. What you see in the newsletters is just the sort of tip of the iceberg. There is a lot of background research which is done by assistant curators led by Stephanie and a team which distilled all of this information. And I'm fortunate that I can present it to you, but I'm just presenter. Therefore, others are doing the hard work. And then we have a briefing at the end of the month on 30th of May on internet governance developments in May. This would be more or less all for today's summary of the major developments. Now I would like to invite you here in the room and our online community to hear what are the comments and questions. Roxana? No, everything is clear. Good. Any comments or questions here in the room? No. Okay. Including Richard. Richard, I'm worried when you don't ask the questions. I'm usually worried. Okay, I feel better now. Okay.
The first one is you mentioned that Canadian spam workshop and the resulting report, which I thought was excellent. But what also struck me is I went back and looked, and the recommendations they make are basically the same as the ones that were made in the ITU workshop back in 2005. So 12 years later, we still come to the same conclusions about what to do. And the second point was on the FCC wishing to overturn the ruling. I think that under the US law, to actually overturn the order, he would have to argue that something changed. They can't just say, we changed our mind. They have to justify it. So maybe what's more likely is they simply will not enforce it, and maybe that's what they're negotiating. It'd be interesting to follow.
Thank you, Richard. Which they have been already doing with zero rating practices, basically. They haven't been very sort of diligent in enforcing the net neutrality via zero rating practices which have been introduced. Great. Thank you very much. Best regards to our online participants. They will stay with us for the regional discussions and regional briefings. Is it correct? Therefore, now we'll have some refreshment here in Geneva. Unfortunately, we cannot offer the online refreshment for time being. But enjoy online discussion and see you at our forthcoming events and definitely on the 30th of May for May briefing. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, Jovan and Stephanie, for a great roundup of developments in April, and Roxana, our remote moderator, who shared our comments and questions with the EC2 audience. For our online audience, please stay with us for the regional updates. May I also remind you that a parallel room is available for our Southeastern European hub at this link. I will share with you in a moment. Okay, now to the updates. First, we'll hear the update from Brazil. Luca Bailey from the Brazilian Hub will update us on the latest development in the region.
Good morning, Jovan. Good morning to everyone. Welcome to our monthly briefing on digital policy here in Brazil and Latin America. The month of April started with a very successful event here at FGV. We hosted the 9th South School on Internet Governance, which is the main capacity building event on internet governance here at the Latin American level. The event was very successful, and all the debates and lectures will be available on YouTube, and we will share them on our social networking accounts over the next weeks. On a different note, in Brasilia, the Congress approved a bill aimed at regulating anonymous infiltration of police in a social networking platform to cope with pedophilia. The bill now awaits a presidential sanction, and it regulates anonymous infiltration of police, requesting a court order and also requesting a public prosecutor to approve the intervention of the police. Also in Brasilia, 3 different bills were introduced as a result of a very intense public debate on the Blue Whale game. This game has been accused of stimulating suicide amongst youngsters, and as a result of this debate, 3 different bills were introduced. One of them could introduce different intermediary liability regime, and particularly a notice and takedown mechanism, if the bill is approved, in order to take down content that could induce to suicide. It remains very difficult to understand which kind of content could induce to suicide. Lastly, the Supreme Federal Court scheduled a public hearing in order to analyze when applications could be blocked as a result of the various blocking cases of WhatsApp. And the public hearing will be held at the beginning of June. CTS has been invited to participate, and we welcome this opportunity, and we hope that the public hearing will be useful to provide guidance on whether or not and in which conditions application could be blocked. This is all for today. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you next month.
Thank you, Luca. I just want to check if everyone can hear me now before we continue. Okay, great. We will now hear the update from the IG MENA activist from Egypt, who will share some news about Facebook rules for the citizens of Egypt. For those of you from Southeastern Europe, once again, I invite you to join the live discussion going on right now at this link I share with you right now. And for the others, we will now hear the updates from the IG.
The most heated debates on internet governance in Egypt at the moment are basically centered on 3 proposals by members of parliament. The first proposal is basically to introduce Egyptian Facebook users to register on the website and log in as well using their national ID number and keep a record of their current home address. Well, this proposal does not go its own, it goes along with 2 other proposals. The first proposal is basically to create a department that is concerned with the execution of cyber crimes. And at the same time, the record of these violations would basically be held by other users. Now, the second proposal is basically to create an alternative Facebook just for Egyptians, an Egyptian Facebook. Similar to the Chinese and Russian experiment, it is basically to just restrict activity, make sure that everything is monitored, everything is under the radar. And at the same time, one of the justification is a bit economic, that is to avoid the flight of US dollars out of the country, as the services paid on Facebook are done by the US dollar. This is a bit problematic too, because there are a lot of opportunities in which that could be encouraged with more inclusive kind of policies that will encourage exchange of and flow of money and ideas across all platforms of the internet, not just Facebook. The third proposal, and this one is not as radical as the previous two, although the previous two are gaining currency in the parliament and by the government as well. That is to enforce a subscription fee for Egyptian users to use Facebook monthly, a monthly subscription fee. The purpose of the subscription fee is basically to register all internet users and to be able to monitor their activities, attribute this fishy activity to the X-user, and then you can just track them down. And this is the conclusion of it. For more details, you could read the piece on IG developments.
Thank you for participating today. The recording, presentation, and digest will be available soon. One more announcement for you. As you have heard from Stephanie, the Geneva Digital Watch newsletter will be available for download by the end of this week. And you can check it out at this link that I'm sharing with you right now. Thank you once again, and see you on the 30th of May.